Well, good morning, everybody. We're starting right at 12 o'clock. And it's again a pleasure to see everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Pedro Nava. I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission. I want to thank you all for being with us today for this webinar on equitable economic development across California. I want to introduce the other commissioners who are here with us on Zoom. There will be some members who will be joining us as we move along. We see Vice Chair Sean Varner is with us. Dion Aroner will be joining us. Nice wave. Hello, Sean. Dion Aroner will be joining us. David Byer will be coming along. I see Bill Emmerson, Gil Garcetti, and Commissioner Janice Sidley. So thank you, all of you. Also with us today, the Commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, project managers Crystal Beckham and Tristan Stein, and analyst Ashley Hurley. Tristan Stein served as the project manager for the Commission study on regional economic development, and he will be moderating this webinar. Today, we look forward to presenting recommendations from the Commission's report on inclusive regional economic development. We're also honored to be joined by experts working to support regional economic development. Ashley Swearengin of the Central Valley Community Foundation is with us. Jackie Melendez of Inland Economic Growth and Opportunity, IEGO. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, I grew up in San Bernardino and Fontana. I'm a graduate from San Bernardino State, and I attended some of the excellent community colleges that are in the Inland Empire. We're joined by Karen Suarez of Uplift San Bernardino. Here we go, Inland Empire is represented along with the Central Valley. Let's thank our guests for sharing their time and expertise with us today. I've got to do a little bit of housekeeping before we turn to the subject. For our speakers today, your audio and video will be turned on throughout the webinar. However, we ask that you keep yourself muted if you're not presenting. A thank you to those who are following along and have joined us online. Just like our hearings, members of the public will be muted throughout the webinar. After our presentations, we will hold a question and answer period, providing an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question of our panel on today's topic. We have opened up the Zoom Q&A feature to allow you to send in your questions. Staff will be monitoring the Q&A feature and will review your questions and ask them of the appropriate person. You may also email your questions to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. As is our practice with the Commission, we'll also have a public comment session at the end of the webinar. We are recording today's webinar, and after we're completed, staff will place a permanent to the recording on our website and upload it to YouTube channel and our Facebook page. And now to the substance of today's webinar. In our report, Equitable Economic Development Across California, the Commission urges California to do more to facilitate inclusive regional economic development. Today, we will discuss this call to action. First, we're going to have Commissioner Bill Emmerson, who is a member of the subcommittee studying regional economic development, and Commissioner Gil Garcetti, who also serves as the studies subcommittee, to share some of the Commission research and recommendations. With that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Emmerson.
Thank you, Chair Nava. In spring of 2022, the Commission launched a study to examine California's efforts to foster inclusive and sustainable regional growth. In our study, we found that California is a story of two economies. Over recent decades, the economic trajectory of coastal metro areas has diverged dramatically from that of inland and rural parts of the state. California's coastal metros have benefited from large-scale trends in globalization and technological change to emerge as global centers of innovation. Much of the state, however, has not shared in this prosperity. As a result, significant disparities in income, employment, and educational attainment now distinguish inland and rural California from the state's coastal metros. In our study, we learned that reducing these disparities and increasing economic opportunity in less prosperous regions will require inclusive regional economic development. That is, regions need economic growth that fuels the creation of quality jobs. As we discuss in the report, regions can encourage such economic development by building on regional strengths, fostering innovation, encouraging talent development, and supporting traded sectors. But in addition to growth, regions also need greater economic inclusion. And regions can help ensure that growth benefits disinvested communities by addressing barriers to opportunity, investing in community development, and including communities in the planning and decision-making process. California today has the opportunity to lift up these regions that have least shared in the state's economic prosperity. In recent years, a number of regional initiatives have established stakeholder coalitions that are working to promote inclusive economic development. These coalitions are creating and implementing strategies for advancing regional economies that are doing so inclusively. Meanwhile, the state of California has begun the first time to support regional economic development in a consistent and comprehensive manner. With the new Community Economic Resilience Fund, or SERF, state government is now poised to invest $600 million statewide over 4 years in support of regional economic planning and inclusive economic development. However, SERF faces several challenges that threaten its ability to significantly advance regional economies. First, balancing priorities. SERF commendably encourages regions to balance economic growth, social equity, and environmental sustainability. Yet SERF also encompasses a broad range of desired outcomes without establishing clear precedents among its various goals. The risk is that when everything is a priority, nothing is. Second, scale. Although SERF is a sizable investment in regional economies, it is only a drop in the bucket. Lifting up the economies of less prosperous regions will likely require billions of funding over decades. And finally, coordination. There is significant state and federal funding available for regional development. For instance, we identified state resources to support regional initiatives that are spread across 65 programs and 21 agencies and departments. California cannot expect regions to coordinate all these resources alone. Here I will turn to Commissioner Garcetti to discuss the Commission's recommendation for addressing these challenges.
Commissioner Garcetti, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Gil, you're muted.
Commissioner Garcetti, you're
I heard.
muted. Oh,
There you go.
Thank you.
okay.
That was my fault. Sorry. I will start again. But thank you, Commissioner Emmerson. In our report, we offer 7 recommendations to address these challenges and ensure that California provides ongoing support for inclusive regional development. Number 1, the governor, legislature, and relevant state agencies should prioritize historically disadvantaged regions for funding within SERF and related programs. Not all regions have the same institutional capacity for development efforts, and some need additional investment more than others. The state can help rectify long-standing regional disparities by prioritizing funding for more disadvantaged regions. Number 2, policymakers should provide greater clarity and strategic focus to SERF. We recommend focusing SERF more clearly on the creation of quality jobs and on connecting disadvantaged communities with the jobs created. Number 3, State agencies and the legislature should strongly encourage and support regional investment in traded sectors. Traded sectors bring money into regions and drive regional economic growth. We recommend that the legislature support these key sectors by directing training programs to align with the traded sectors that regions identify as priorities. And I'll underline that regions identify as priorities. Number 4, state government should coordinate state funding and programs in support of regional economic development strategies. Specifically, we recommend that the governor create a single senior point of leadership for regional economic development. We also recommend that the governor and legislature direct relevant programs like the California Competes tax credit to align their funding in support of regional development strategies. Number 5, state government needs to build regional capacity for inclusive regional economic development. Building and sustaining regional coalitions for inclusive development requires significant time and significant resources. To help sustain initiatives, we recommend that the legislature dedicate ongoing funding, underline that, ongoing funding for capacity building, especially in less prosperous regions. This funding would give convening organizations predictable resources for maintaining partnerships, updating regional strategies, and building expertise. We also recommend that the governor and legislature begin planning for how to structure and sustain regional partnerships after the end of SURF. Number 6, the legislature should allocate ongoing funding to enable institutions of higher education to act as leaders in regional economic development. Colleges and universities are key to sustaining inclusive economic development in the long term. This funding will help them align with regional development strategies. Finally, the state should regularly collect and report relevant regional metrics. Having standardized metrics will help state leaders better understand how all regions are performing. These metrics will also serve as a reminder of the inequities the state has yet to fully address and keep us on track. Before I ask our project manager, Tristan Stein, to introduce our first guest speaker, I just wanted to single out, as I'm sure our chair will later, the work that Tristan and his colleagues did in undertaking this very, very difficult, complex project. They did a fabulous job working with the commissioners and getting this done. So thank you, Tristan. And now I turn it over to you to introduce our first guest speaker.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcetti, and thank you and to the other commissioners for all of your excellent and always appreciated work on this project. Our first panelist today is Ashley Swearengin. Ashley Swearengin is President and CEO of the Central Valley Community Foundation. And prior to joining the foundation, she served as mayor of Fresno from 2009 through 2016. Mayor Swearengin also sits on numerous boards of organizations dedicated to economic empowerment and educational attainment in the Central Valley and throughout California, including the College Futures Foundation, Urban Institute, California Forward, and New America. Mayor Swearengin, you may please begin your presentation now.
Thank you so much. And that is my cue to start my timer as well. So I stay on time. Thank you for the opportunity and really just most importantly, thank you so much to the Little Hoover Commission for this report. I feel like the light has shone brightly on the importance of this topic, and I echo Commissioner Garcetti's sentiment. Tristan and the team have done a remarkable job, and it is not easy to grapple with and get to the bottom of the tension around inclusive economic development. So this is a really terrific report and worthy of lifting up. Let's go to the next slide. just going to share a little bit about our journey in the greater Fresno region and the central San Joaquin Valley through an initiative called Fresno Drive, which has been a remarkable experience without support from the Irvine Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, the Community Foundation, so many community partners, we would not have gotten to this point. There was a pivotal moment in 2019 when many of us gathered to ask the big questions about what is the future economy? What does it need to look like in the greater Fresno area? And we knew things were bad in Fresno. I mean, I just had finished 8 years as mayor of Fresno. I'd been done community economic development work at Fresno State for 8 years prior to that, had been involved in a nonprofit business incubator. I thought I had a pretty good beat on what was happening with our local and regional economy. The Urban Institute, however, published research just the year before looking at economic growth of major American cities in the US, or major cities in the US, and then also in California, cities over 100,000 in size. There are 59 of them. And this research came out and it was like a gut punch to many of us in the central San Joaquin Valley who had been working hard at economic development for decades. The first statistic on the left, not a surprise, 55 out of 59 in terms of overall economic growth among major cities in California. I was like, yeah, I kind of figured that. Things are always bad here. So that's about where I figured we would land. But the real devastating data point was that in this really poor economy, people who, communities of color, brown and black residents in our community are more likely to have it worse in Fresno than any other large city in California. So 59 out of 59 for racial inclusion in our overall economy in Fresno. That was a devastating and really altering data point that came out. So those of us who are grappling with what do we do? I think we all thought like, yeah, we definitely need jobs. But what we learned very quickly was if, let's say 10,000 quality jobs showed up in our community tomorrow, the evidence from the last 40 years suggests that that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to benefit communities of color. So this became the organizing principle for the Fresno Drive initiative. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to keep my comments very brief. The Drive initiative, this is our theory of change. We're not going to talk about this in great detail, but I really just wanted to call attention to a few key things on this chart. First of all, our North Star, which is to the right of the slide, economic growth that is both inclusive, increases prosperity and overall economic growth, the twin goals, if you will, of inclusive economic development. That's not a surprise. But I think what was a real struggle for us and what we really tried to capture in this theory of change is there's been so much talk about putting race equity at the center of any number of community efforts. And we felt like a lot of times it's talk, but how do you get beyond talk to operationalizing that commitment? So our theory of change really calls out the three circles in the middle of this slide are what we've concluded locally with a lot of help from experts on how we can best do that. And it starts with every single actor involved in Fresno Drive, community partners, consultants, sponsoring organizations, et cetera, showing a commitment to shared understanding and analysis and undertaking a lot of learning and talking and shared space together where we're learning about the history of systemic racism in Fresno and the Central Valley and looking at its ongoing effects today. So we kind of just like to say we're rooted in that shared understanding and analysis, and everybody involved with Drive has to make that commitment. The second major piece of demonstrating and operationalizing our commitment to race equity is the continuous engagement of communities that have historically been left out. And then thirdly, explicit financial investment in those communities and in those communities' priority. So we're wrapping this entire sort of regional economic development effort around these three key actions that operationalize our commitment to race equity. Let's go to the next slide. After an exhaustive planning process and assessing what was already in flight, so we hit the Drive planning process after about 15 years of good, solid spade work at individual issue level, sort of pilot projects that were showing some results. But what we were concerned about is those pilot projects that might be helping, a couple hundred families or a couple thousand families, which was terrific every year, needed to be scaled to get to the point where they could impact tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of families and ultimately small millions of people who call the central San Joaquin Valley home. So that was our task in the summer of 2019, is like, what are those efforts that are already underway? How do we scale them? How do we ensure that they have a commitment to race equity? And that became the DRIVE portfolio, which is represented here, organized in 3 major buckets: economic development, human capital, and neighborhood or place-based development. So another part of kind of the, we think, sort of the genius of the way we've gone about this in our local community is that we finally tied together folks who are thinking about and working towards regional economic development, working alongside those who are doing place-based work. And it's very difficult to make that connection. And then of course, human capital holds all of these things together. So doing this work together and not in isolation is a big part of what we're testing, and believe it will result in impact. Next slide, and last slide for me, as I'm running short on time. So lessons learned, I'm just really echoing here. I picked 3 of the recommendations and the real conclusions from the Little Hoover Commission. I really could have said, like, your report is just spot on, and really affirm all of the things that you're lifting up in the report. 3 of those things that I think are most critical for us in the Central San Joaquin Valley is this focus on both growth and inclusion. I know that in coastal areas where there's much greater levels of prosperity, a lot of the focus at the community level is on, like, okay, let's build ladders of inclusion and let's make sure people are accessing the prosperity that's already there. The opposite is true in inland California, where we have suffered for so long with flat economies. A lot of focus is on what do we have to do to just create jobs, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about anticipating those jobs are here. How are we ensuring that we're including? There's tension around this point. I think for us in Fresno, we conceded, those of us who have been working on the job side of it, conceded we need to focus first on inclusion and trust and expect that growth actually is an outflow of that. And once we build trusted relationships and infrastructure that can ensure inclusion, we really expect to see the growth part of our work take off. Secondly, we'll underscore the importance of the state prioritizing historically disadvantaged regions across the country, where we see in the Rust Belt, for instance, major cities that have been gutted out. Those cities that have made a comeback, it's because their states prioritize those cities, period, full stop. So it really does have to be a priority for California. And then lastly, I want to call out a combination of the recommendations from your report, building the infrastructure for regional inclusive economic growth. It's more than just a czar. It's more than just a person in Sacramento who's got singular responsibility. We've got all these amazing planning tables that are now bursting forth throughout California. That is an important first and next step. The reality is, however, there is no lasting infrastructure with jurisdiction/power and resources to carry out these plans. So we should be thinking and talking now, anticipating SURF plans coming out in the next 2.5 years. Like, what is the lasting infrastructure that can continue to carry those agendas that get birthed at the SURF table? In some regions, it makes sense to be MPOs, not in every region, however. I appreciated your report's focus on institutions of higher education, community colleges, and four-year universities, because the reality is that those are the jurisdictions throughout the state that actually do cover kind of regional commute shed levels of geography. So I certainly think our higher ed institutions have a huge part to play here in carrying these recommendations forward. So with that, I'll pause and hand it back to Tristan and look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Swearengin. Our next panelist will be Jackie Melendez. Ms. Melendez is the first executive director of Inland Growth and Opportunity, IEGO, a regional collaborative in Southern California focused on building inclusive economic development in the Inland Empire. Ms. Melendez is a passionate and experienced economic and workforce development professional who has worked in local government for 18 years and pulls from a diverse background in community building, strategic planning, human-centered design, and business and workforce development. Ms. Melendez, you may please begin your presentation now.
Thank you, Tristan, and thank you to the Little Hoover Commission and our Chairman Nava for the opportunity to speak. The last time we were together was here in the Inland Empire in Riverside, and that was May 26th, and a lot has happened since then. I I wanted to start by just saying thank you to several of our commissioners who are from the Inland Empire and advocate on our behalf. Folks like Commissioner Varner, Commissioner Emmerson, and Chair Nava. So thank you so much for your efforts to uplift the Inland Empire and inland Southern California. I want to start by thanking our regional leaders. This work is really hard. And in preparation for today, I went back and listened to some of the testimony. And I have to say, what was shared on May 26th was really gold. And now that I look back at it, all these months later, there's a lot of foreshadowing in there. And so I wanted to thank this commission for really taking to heart the recommendations. As I read the report and the recommendations, we heard what was said in those meetings, and you'll hear from Karen Suarez next. She and I sort of brainstormed on it and reflected on it, and we really felt heard. So I want to say thank you, because that can be a rare thing, and it's a difficult thing to accomplish. So thank you. When you came last, I said, welcome from the trenches, and I'm going to do the same today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture of what it looks like in what I call Surflandia. So living and breathing surf on an everyday basis, operationalizing the things that are in the SFP and the guidelines, and now in this report, making that happen on a day-to-day basis, building the collaborations and the coalitions. I want to give you a little bit of what that looks like. And I also want to talk a little bit about what our application in the Inland Empire looked like, because I don't think that we're sharing enough about how this is getting operationalized. Folks who know me to be a big picture person, but a very pragmatic person. I want to know how things are going to get done, and I want to roll up my sleeves and make it happen. So I want to talk really quickly as well, just to say thank you to our sponsors for IEGO. This work that we do would not be possible if it wasn't for folks like James Irvine Foundation, Bank of America, and our Inland Empire Community Foundation under the leadership of Michelle Decker. She is a warrior working in the trenches on these projects, and the report does talk about leadership, and that is really critical in this work that we're doing. I also wanted to say I'm going to speak specifically about one recommendation and hyper focus on it, and that's recommendation number 5. But before I do that, I do want to make mention of the importance of our colleges and universities in the work that we do. We could not do this work in our region. That's UC Riverside, that's Cal State San Bernardino, it's our community colleges, it's the economic development folks in our cities and in our counties that are coming in and rolling up their sleeves to do this work as well. And then I also wanted to say to our community-based organizations who are engaging in new and really innovative ways and working with all of us to try to figure this stuff out and to make it happen. Thank you to all of those folks. So what's happened since we spoke last? Well, we submitted our SURF application, and we are now the regional co-convener for the Inland Empire region. So the co-conveners for Inland Empire are IEGO and the Inland Empire Labor Institute, and our fiscal agent is the Community Foundation. So that's news. We also had an economic summit, a statewide summit hosted by California Forward. And I wanted to say a big thank you to Micah Weinberg and his staff there for the work that they did at that conference, and also the communities of practice work that they're doing to help really create a network across the state for all the folks that are in the trenches that are working on SURF. And so that has been really helpful. And so I thank California Forward and their staff. We are, myself and Courtney Farrell from Chico State are co-leading a statewide group on advancing inclusive economic development. And at the Economic Summit, we had about 400 people attend our workshop in person to talk about going beyond SURF. So one of the messages that I always talk about when we're talking about SURF is to make sure that we realize that inclusive economic development is the umbrella. That's the big picture. What's about to happen in our state is so many folks are getting activated and thinking about inclusive economic development, but SURF will likely be their first touch. It'll be the thing that defines inclusive economic development, but it is one tool, and we need to leverage that tool. Our application requires us to create a high road transition collaborative, an HRTC. And just to paint a picture of what this looks like on the regional level is that table will have 6 sub-regional tables. It'll cover all of Riverside and San Bernardino counties, including Coachella Valley and the high desert. We'll have 7 equity councils, and these will serve as incubator spaces to make sure that we stay on target with our equity goals for workers and women and our tribal partners, tribal communities, that we stay focused on issues like environmental justice and racial and social justice and justice reform. These are some of the things that were elevated in our region, and I provide them as examples because they're unique to the space that we call the Inland Empire. Other folks, their HRTCs will look different, and how it comes together looks different. But I thought it would be interesting for folks to know how we're operationalizing it. It'll also include committees that'll look at budget, and there's going to be a lot of contracting and folks that have to be hired to do the work of SURF. And so we're super excited about that. We're about to embark on that. That's the next step. The next step for SURF throughout the state of California. Throughout the state, we have regions that are about to erect, and everybody's in different phases of what this looks like. But they're about to go into this new phase of bringing people together and actually doing this work. So once again, looking back at our May 26th meeting, it feels like today is also going to be foreshadowing. And when we maybe talk to each other in 6 months, I'm very excited to see what that might look like. But I wanted to close with just a couple of thoughts. And that's that when it comes to this work, we heard over and over that this work is hard. And so recommendation number 5 is really important in that we look at mechanisms for the sustainability of these regional efforts. We are with SURF phase 1, creating all these spaces throughout every corner of California. And it would be a shame if once these funds run out, we don't have the funding to continue the good work that is being done across our state. And I'll just close by saying, we're in a special moment. And I thank the Little Hoover Commission for recognizing the special moment we're in. We have a lot of new mayors and supervisors and legislators throughout our state, and if they can hear my voice now, I ask them to join with us and to really focus on this regional work. It is not in competition with local economic development. It is actually something to help and enhance local economic development efforts. So with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you to our regional economic development leaders and our regional economic development leaders in training. The work that you do is necessary. And I'm very proud to be in this work alongside of amazing leaders in the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Melendez. And our final panelist today will be Karen Suarez. Ms. Suarez is the director of Uplift San Bernardino, a collective impact program of the Making Hope Happen Foundation. Ms. Suarez also serves as the co-chair of IEGO, as well as serving on other regional boards. Ms. Suarez has extensive experience in collective impact work throughout the Inland Empire region. And Ms. Suarez, you may begin your presentation now, please.
Thank you so much, Tristan. I'm so delighted to be here with you all today. I too want to echo the sentiments of my colleague Jackie and Ashley. I'm incredibly grateful for the work that the Little Hoover Commission embarked on in establishing this report. We really meant it when we said that we feel so heard. and to see a direct reflection of the policy work that we've been in conversations with Brookings and this long regional conversation that we've had around jobs and opportunities for our community, and especially our families who don't have a college degree. I really feel that you touched on some incredible points that we feel heard, and we thank you for including these recommendations in your report. I especially want to touch on you uplifting the need for capacity, prioritizing disadvantaged communities, the traded sector opportunity and training that goes along with that. What does that mean for communities like ours? What does that mean for our entrepreneurs? What does that mean for what exists in our market? And so really, really, again, appreciate what you lifted in this report. Uplift is also really inspired by the work of Fresno Drive and has been watching for a really long time. And so like Fresno, Uplift San Bernardino has focused on neighborhood development, economic opportunities, and our human capital in the city of San Bernardino. And through our collective impact, our mission is to build a generation of successful adults committed to growing roots in our great city. And being a co-chair for IEGO has really given our network the opportunity to learn, to connect with our regional partners in ways that we can integrate ourselves and what our students are learning into the cluster work. It gives us tangible opportunities for our residents and for our youth. In San Bernardino, we had an opportunity to get a CARB grant and start to integrate that clean tech work that IEGO is focused on and work with students, have our students co-design EV infrastructure and clean transportation workforce trainings so that they can have interest in these sectors. And so when we talk about inclusive economic development, that's what this can look like, is bringing our youth, bringing our families along with us to co-design and co-create the opportunities that we know are desperately needed in our neighborhoods. As we are gearing up for SURF, we know that capacity is a huge issue. And so again, I really thank you for highlighting that, because it is absolutely necessary for us to come together, not just as a region, but also place-based locally, so that we can leverage the assets and leverage each other's strengths in moving this work forward. And another update is that San Bernardino recently launched the San Bernardino Investment Playbook, really a beautiful document that lifts up community priorities and is a wonderful partnership that was created because of our anchor institutions like our city and our university, Cal State San Bernardino, along with other partners. And we're really grateful to work alongside as community with our anchor institutions in order to have more housing, have more infrastructure projects, have innovation in our community, build capacity together. And I want to, again, just express my sincere gratitude to our entire network and to our IEGO network. None of the successes that we've had, none of this collaboration that we had is possible. The only way for us to move this work forward is through inclusion and making sure that we are leaning on the expertise of our residents and of our youth. And I really, really want to give a shout out because I know that Mr. Suarez at Arroyo Valley High School is watching this with his students. So shout out to you students who are listening to this right now, because I think that seminars like this are really important for our community to engage in. And I appreciate the open forum and the fact that it's being live streamed on Facebook and social media. There are a lot of ways to communicate this work. And so really appreciate that we're being innovative and making our government and our commissions more accessible for the community at large. So thank you for having me today. Just wanted to share my reflections and really express sincere gratitude to our entire network, both IEGO and Uplift San Bernardino. Appreciate your time, Little Hoover, for establishing again this report.
Thank you, Ms. Suarez, and thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us today and for sharing your reactions to the report and your thoughts more broadly on inclusive regional economic development in California. We're going to move now to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and as Chair Nava mentioned at the beginning, you may use the Q&A function of Zoom to submit your questions. I would also like to invite the commissioners to ask questions or make any comments as well, please. And I see that Commissioner Aronor has raised her hand.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank our guest speakers for your updates since we were last together. So it sounds like there is a lot of planning going on, right? That you're in the first phase of this effort. But has there been discussion around like timelines regarding, what do you hope to accomplish? Do you have some stated goals regarding we want to be sure that we can employ blank number of people at living wage or above jobs by such and such a date, and an idea about in what industries and whatever you see that happening? Do each of these efforts have that kind of timeline already developed, or is that what you're talking about in your planning? And I'll take an answer from anybody, any of the three of you, whoever wants to go first.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, pardon me. Go ahead, Jackie.
I was just going to say that with IEGO, we're a cluster strategy, so we're focused on 4 clusters. Much of that corresponds with the strategy with SURF. What's happening with SURF in terms of a timeline? The regions are still working on a contract with the state, and so once that contract happens per the SFP, we'll have 60 days to come up with the planning plan, and then 90 days to get the HRTCs up and rolling. And so to answer it from a SURF perspective, it'll be the work of the planning phase, which will take about 18 months to 2 years to be able to really decide from a community standpoint with all of the partners what those goals are going to be.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Ashley?
and I'll just sure. So in 2019, we kicked off our planning process. We gave ourselves like essentially the summer and early fall to go from very high level to directionally correct numbers. How much do we need? What are the outcomes? So we got to that level of detail by the end of the year in 2019. We then spent another year and a half refining those conceptual plans into implementation plans, and to ensure that we were embedding community engagement, race equity across each of our now 14 initiatives. So we've completed that. We now have, most of our initiatives within the overall portfolio are operating on a like 2020 to 2030 timeline. What can we accomplish for how much money? What are the outcomes by then? And then, each of these initiatives, just one initiative is an effort to improve the sustainability and the diversity of the regional economy. So that has like literally dozens and dozens of component parts. So as we get into implementation mode, kind of each of those parts start breaking off, and they've got specific funding requirements and specific timelines and that sort of thing. So I'd say we're seeing that kind of detail coming through the implementation stage.
Thank you.
Thank you to both Ms. Melendez and Ms. Swearengin, or Mayor Swearengin, excuse me. Commissioner Byer.
Oh, thank you. And I'm completely supportive of the report that we wrote, but I want to raise two issues. And they're really suggestions for the panelists. The first is, as you think about jobs, please take a look at what Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro did this week by eliminating the requirement of four-year degrees for 95% of state jobs. Think about that. Think about the economic impediments. And importantly, he said also to state agencies, don't ask about what degree you have, ask about your experience, the work experience first. That's point one. Point two is I'm the product of what I read most recently, and in this case, it's a book called Unequal Cities. The subtitle is Overcoming Anti-City Bias to Reduce Inequality in the United States. And it contains case studies, New York, Detroit, Los Angeles, and talks about the misalignment. And I know Sean Varner's ears will perk up, the realignment between the powers of cities, regions, and states. Those issues are very big, and it's going to be difficult, I think, for some regions to be successful unless there's an integrated strategy that benefits not just the suburban ring, but the center of a city. And so that's not something we spent a lot of time on in our hearings, but I strongly recommend this book and the research behind it. It was eye-opening to me because people tend to conflate cities and regions, and that's not true, not fair, and leads you into some blind canyons. So just two things to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Byer. And I think I'll invite Mayor Swearengin to begin responding to the large question, large suggestions there.
Well, I'll just kind of pile on and affirm what you've raised. So on the first issue, I had not heard about that. That's really exciting. I think that's something our state legislative leaders should be taking up. What we're kind of landing on at the local and regional level and working with our higher education partners is competency-based education. So at the community college level, for instance, with our food and farm workers wanting to upskill a significant portion of our workforce to access higher paying jobs within the industry. These are folks who have been working in literally in the fields for 15, 20 years. They know more about the industry than any professor that you could possibly put in front of them. And in fact, they should really be teaching the courses at the community college level. So one of the things we're doing with the Future of Food Innovation Initiative is using some of our grant dollars to get our community colleges equipped to assess people's skills that they're coming to the table with and be able to honor and acknowledge that skill and get them farther along in their certificate program and not have them repeat like basic things that they already know based on work experience. That's a little bit of an offshoot to your first point. And I know that's happening around the state, but it's not happening all that much in the Central Valley. So we're very committed to trying to operationalize policy change that the state has already made possible. And then your second point about cities and the difference between cities and regions is so critical. There's a fundamental misunderstanding at the local government level, frankly, every level of government, but for sure at the local government level about what is economic development, what happens at the regional level, why does it matter what happens at the, how does work at the neighborhood level or the city ring level impact and connect with the regional level? So I think your report actually starts to call that out and talking about traded sectors in every city. And, I'm in the Central Valley, and as the former mayor of the city of Fresno, I believe that, if it wasn't for the city of Fresno, there would be no regional economy. And I oftentimes made all of the regional stuff just about my city. That's not really an accurate, I mean, of course, I'm a great advocate for in my city, so I was supposed to do that kind of stuff. But the truth is, the city of Fresno operates within this regional economy, a commute shed that's about 4 counties. And so our job was to lean in and lift up the things that needed to happen at the 4 county level, but then take care of our place, because we know that cities are the places where talent is formed, supported, nurtured, grown, et cetera, to fuel that regional economy. So if our neighborhoods are falling apart, the chances are the schools that are in those neighborhoods are equally as devastated, and we're doing everything possible to, to block growth of the regional economy. So understanding how all these layers work is really important. I think SURF does a good job of kind of forcing all these actors together. What's going to need to happen though, when we all kind of slam into these tables, is we need a primer on like, hey, here's kind of where all of these different things sit, and then we can strategize accordingly. But it is often misunderstood, and an important point to raise.
Yeah, just one last point. Sacramento, the county, recently entered into an agreement on homelessness and housing. It was necessary because the city lacked authority to do something about housing. The county had it, and they had to share financing and administration of a brand new program, which other than the city and county of San Francisco could apply across the state. And that kind of modeling of cooperation between levels of government is going to be the key to success of the economic development you're talking about. But people in suburbia, to be honest, don't understand the relationship between their county government or their suburban government and city government, and why cooperation is necessary for everybody to win.
And I think I'd also like to, building on Commissioner Byer's question, I'd like to ask, I think, Ms. Suarez to talk a little bit as well about the work that you've been doing on connecting the kind of regional level economic development piece with that really place-based, community-based community development piece. If you could talk a little bit about that, and maybe also just add, what more could the state government do to help regions connect these two different levels and kinds of activities?
Yeah, I think for us, the important part is being able to bring this regional lens and what this regional framework looks like, right, for economic development, and really inviting our community to learn more about that. And what does that look like in implementing it on the ground as job creators, right, through our entrepreneurs and through our schools and the training programs that they have available through career, technical, and education. I mean, for me, this economic development is not where I was formally trained. And so for me, it's been really about kind of matchmaking this inclusive economic development work and matchmaking it with what we have existing in our community. And how do we lift that up and make more connections with our city governments, with our county jurisdictions, with the programs and the workforce development, the training that is already happening, so that we have a more visible pipeline of opportunity, or pathway of opportunities for residents and our youth. There are apprenticeship programs that are in existence now, right, that could lead to these high-paying careers, these high-road jobs that we're looking for, that would produce economic mobility for our families. But how are they going to know about them, right, if we don't have trusted messengers on the ground who are connecting them to those opportunities? And so I think that's we've been the glue, and empowering our staff, empowering our CBOs, helping our small entrepreneurs understand how they can play a role. And I often say this to our network, we all play a role in the advancement and in the prosperity of our neighborhoods. And it starts with us and identifying what role we want to play. And so I think those are the ways that, we've been connected the local to the regional opportunities. I also want to just respond really quickly to Commissioner about that. You may appreciate that the Ad Council has put out a new initiative. They have a campaign for all employers to consider hiring stars. So these are workers who are skilled through alternative routes. And it was great because one of our staff members in our city government lifted this up on her LinkedIn profile, which is where I learned about it. And I just found her story so compelling about how she, has been able to get so many wonderful opportunities in government, on the job, that on-the-job training just being incredibly invaluable. And I also think about the financial sector where bankers and tellers have been able to get trained, because there's some valuable training in these institutions and in our large employers that can really help families with economic mobility as well.
Thank you, Ms. Suarez. And Chair Nava, I see that you have raised your hand.
Yep, I raised my hand. One of the things I'd like to learn about as you go through this process is whether or not you encounter issues with licensing. So as you try to prepare people for higher end jobs and better jobs, Little Hoover Commission in the past has written a report about the state of licensing in California and how many occupations are perhaps burdened by unnecessary licensing. So for example, if you want to be a cosmetologist, I think I remember you have to have more hours than a EMT. And I don't understand why those kinds of limitations are imposed, but it's going to be interesting to see as you move forward, and you talk about stars, and you have an emphasis on, as Commissioner Byer pointed out, eliminate the college requirements, take a look at what people know based on their experience and what they're skilled at, whether or not the licensing requirements as you move forward are the sorts of things that create impediments for people to be successful. I don't expect an answer right now, but I'm just guessing as you move forward, you're going to encounter that. And it seems to me that through Little Hoover, we may be a good vehicle to elevate that to a conversation with the legislature.
Thank you, Chair Nava. And since I don't see any other commissioner hands raised right now, I wanted to turn to a couple of questions that we've received through Zoom. And we've actually received a couple questions regarding strategy and planning going forward. Now, obviously, this is part of the SURF process. So I'd like to actually take that just a little bit, just a step further and ask, we're at this kind of like unique moment where there's a huge amount of federal money, of federal investment, potential federal investment in the pipeline. I'd like to ask our panelists, what can state government do to better help regions access and leverage this potential federal funding for long-term sustained economic growth in California's regions? And maybe we'll start with Mayor Swearengin.
Sure. Well, I think that tees up a report, I think that's soon to be released by California Forward on the massive infrastructure investment that's coming our way, both dollars that the state has set aside as well as formula funds that the federal government is allocating to California. I don't want to get ahead of things, and I've only just seen drafts, but there are some terrific recommendations coming forward there. And so I definitely would encourage the commission to keep a lookout for that report and dive deep on that. I think there's some good policy recommendations. So I'll leave it at that. But in sort of maybe one more comment. So I feel like as much as possible, if the state can set aside funds for communities that have historically not accessed these larger grants, if they can, as many carve outs as possible for underinvested communities and regions, and give these regions a chance to catch up, that's going to be really important. A lot of times, like the competitive grants where localities are directly pursuing federal grants, I mean, obviously the cities with capacity are the ones who win those dollars. And so the state and the Newsom administration, I think, has done a really good job of like calling out the importance of the governor's office has to help champion inland California because we just don't have the numbers in the legislature to get equal attention. But I do think the state's got to be a little bit of a buffer, grab some of those funds that are coming in at the state level, set them aside, give a chance for these smaller and less capacitated regions to access those. And then back to a recommendation in your report, like, this is not just like, oh, while surf is happening, like, we're all really interested in this. This is, and Jackie said it well, this is long-term, hard work, building the capacity of community groups, communities, local governments, regional entities in under-resourced areas. I'm in it now 25 years. And I mean, we're just barely getting to the point where we feel like we can start to lift at the right altitude.
And I would invite Ms. Melendez and Ms. Suarez to also respond to the question in terms of both how IEGO is thinking about how to access and leverage these potential funding sources, and what state government could do to help fulfill that.
Yeah. So we talk about, I support everything that that Ashley just said in that regard. What I want to kind of say is that we keep saying like this work is hard. Like, how is it hard? Like, what does that mean, right? Like, can we give you like a tangible example with surf? And that's that you're building these tables of sort of strange bedfellows, right? Like folks that usually aren't sitting down at the table together talking are now having really critical conversations. And so in the community and economic development space, there's been, there's a lot of tension there, right? You're sitting across from somebody who might have come and protested and killed a project that you worked on for 5 years, right? As an economic developer, I worked on getting a coffee shop to a community. It took me 5 years, right? So these things, it's the long game. And so what we've seen with surf and what makes it so hard is our regional leaders are bringing these folks to the table. We've talked about, I gave a shout out to all the cities, please come and be a part of this conversation in your regions, but that's also extended to our businesses. We talked back in May about how difficult it is to get businesses to the table. My fear is when it comes to infrastructure, we're going to have an even bigger fight because, in the community and economic development space, we've been working on some of these spaces and bringing community-based organizations. They're doing a lot of this work. Infrastructure is a little bit different, right? You're talking usually about way bigger dollars. So the capacity for these community-based organizations to have the expertise to sit at the table, to apply for these multi-million dollar grants, or maybe they've never even received $1 million grant. This is the kind of work that needs the help and the patience, and it needs leadership within these regions to say, we're here for the long haul. My business has been here for 40 years. We're not going anywhere. We want to be a part of the solution. And we need those folks, like Karen said something about, building youth that want to establish roots in the communities. It's the same thing with businesses. We need to bring them to the table, or else, none of this is going to work. You can't do economic development if your cities aren't involved. Sorry, it's not going to happen. We can have all the conversations and we can have all the fun and all that stuff, but it's not going to happen if the people who make economic development decisions on a day-to-day basis aren't sitting at the table. And so it's the same thing with businesses. And we've heard that over and over and over. And that's that we've got to get folks to the table. We got to have hard conversations, and we have to be adults about how we are going to move the needle and create a different conversation and be brave enough to have to envision and to create a better future for our communities.
Yeah, and I just want to, I think what the state can help us do too is help continue to support the collaboration, lifting up our assets so that we're not competing within our region, but figuring out where our strengths are and leveraging that so that we can get to this end product or this end work that will be beneficial to our residents and to our neighborhoods and communities. And I also really like what some of our philanthropy partners are doing. They're figuring out, okay, who wants to be a part of this work, but just doesn't have the bandwidth. carving out some of that money again for capacity, bringing more coalitions together locally or where, I think about disadvantaged communities, right? We have that historical, but places like San Bernardino, we just came out of a bankruptcy. We're still hiring staff. We are at a huge disadvantage trying to pursue grants at the state and federal level if we don't have the staffing yet. And we're working on it. And there's a lot of really wonderful incentives. We want to be a pro-housing city, for example, but how do we do that when we are, we're still working on our housing element and processes that way, right? So I do think the state can play a big role in helping us collaborate and lift up the investments that are needed for our region instead of competing with each other.
Thank you, Ms. Suarez. So we've gone past one. I do want to make sure, Chair Nava, I see that your hand is raised. I wasn't sure if that was from before. Okay. I think since we've gone past one, what I'd like to do at this point is thank again our panelists, Mayor Swearengin, Ms. Melendez, Ms. Suarez. Thank you for taking the time and for sharing your thoughts, observations, and perspective with us in this webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Little Hoover Commission's Executive Director, Ethan Rarick, to take us into the public comment session portion of this meeting.
Thank you very much, Tristan. And thank you again to all of the panelists, as you mentioned, and to the commissioners. If Ashley can put up the instructions for public comment on the screen, please. If you are zooming into the meeting, you should use the raised hand function if you wish to make public comment. If you have phoned in, email us at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. That address is on the screen, littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Give us your phone number so we know who to unmute. But if you have zoomed in, just raise your hand. In keeping with the Commission's traditional practice, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and the commissioners will be able to hear you but not see you while you make public comment. So at this point, I will ask Ashley if anyone has indicated a desire to make public comment.
Oh,
Ashley.
we have no requests for public comment on Zoom or on email.
All right, then I think, Mr. Chairman, we have completed our agenda for today. And so I think we can close out this webinar unless you wanted to make some final remarks, or Vice Chairman Varner or any of the other commissioners.
Just let me say, Little Hoover Commission has been an advocate for amending the rules and the law with respect to meetings by remote. And I think if you take a look at our biennial report, you can see that the extraordinary explosion volume of the number of meetings that we've had and the outreach that we've been able to engage in through these remote meetings and through Zoom. And we heard one of our panelists today talk about a shout out to a teacher who had a class who was also participating in this webinar that they would not ordinarily be able to do. I mean, one of the benefits of meeting by remote, and no offense to Vice Chair Varner, we will be doing some in-person meetings as well. But there are some advantages with respect to public participation when we are able to do this by remote. I mean, we had these 3 panelists that under normal circumstances either would not have participated because of the expense, the time, and the inconvenience, who were able to share with us their experience on the ground implementing the goals and objectives of SURF and how they're going to do it. And they were gracious enough to say that they felt they had been heard. And that's a consequence, I think, directly of we had a public meeting where they had a chance to participate, but we're able to follow up on remote. I saw that at one point we had about 118 participants. That's more people than we normally would have been able to reach when you have a public meeting. So I just, that's my pitch to the legislature, anybody who's watching. You want to change Bagley-Keene so that we can continue to do this kind of work, we would certainly appreciate it. And I see that Vice Chair Varner has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, well, one, Chairman, I don't disagree with you on the impact of having remote capabilities. This is, I just wanted to make a comment with regard to equitable economic development in this study. Over the past several years, we have been very, very good about following up on implementation. This SURF is a preliminary step in equitable economic development, and this is not going to be a sprint. It's a marathon. This is going to take a long time, as we heard from Brookings Institute back in May here at in Riverside. They indicated that it could take 20 years to turn around a regional economy. So there's a lot of work to do that probably will be after our time on the commission. And so I just encourage us to continue to be focused on this and look at implementation and be active rather than reactive with regard to what we can do to continue the conversation and look at potential resources that the state can provide beyond SURF. And that's going to need, like Ms. Suarez or Ms. Melendez said, the collaboration, ensuring that the collaboration is a focus is really critically important, because there's a lot of different sectors that need to come together to make this really work.
Thank you
Agreed.
very much.
Let's back to Ethan.
No, I think we have completed the agenda for today, Mr. Chairman. The next meeting of the commission will be February 9th, as commissioners know, and we'll be providing more information as that date approaches. So I think we've completed and we can adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Everybody stay safe. See you soon.